Excellent. Shall we start? People are coming in. Welcome. Ellie has closed the door. That means we can start. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ellie, and thank you for all of you joining the session here today. 1 hour talking about the dynamic cyber risk landscape. My name is Oliver Delvos. I started with Corvus in early July, and I'm heading up the international division for Corvus. Over the next hour, I would like to talk about cyber risk, basically how we see cyber risk at Corvus. And basically, I have subdivided the presentation into 5 topics where we can then also have time for discussion, where you obviously can ask questions. I mean, this is a workshop. Hopefully, it's getting not too warm. We worked on the air conditioning, so let's see how it goes. But please feel free to grab a drink if it gets too hot. There should also be some ice somewhere. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the session. And I would say just let's get started. I hope you can all hear me okay. If you can't hear me okay, please raise your hand and I can answer all your questions. Good. What do we want to do over the next hour? I would like to talk about the characteristics of CAT events. I would like to talk about why cyber is different. Is it actually different? Is it maybe not as different as we think? I don't know how many people in the room are working on cyber right now. Maybe show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so okay, some. But for some it is also new. That's what I suspected. That's what I assumed. So basically what I wanted to do in this presentation, really to discuss what we already know, how we bring in cyber, and basically how we do the underwriting, where we bring the, let's say, the traditional underwriting together with the technology. Obviously, that what we're all concerned about in cyber is aggregation, risk accumulation. So basically, we at Corvus developed our own proprietary risk aggregation platform that I want to show later on. It has worked a minute ago, so I still hope that it works in about like 40 minutes, where we can just like click through some of the items basically that we have developed at Corvus. Good. For those who don't know who we are actually like a young company, but not too young. So we are about like 5 years old. InsurTech, founded in Boston, 2017. We have grown substantially over the last years. So we are also now an international company. That's why we're also here. So we used to be an America-only company until end of last year, based in Boston by Phil Edmondson and Mike Lloyd. We have grown. We're not only doing cyber, we're also doing other products, but obviously our home is cyber, and basically where we also can see how can technology basically make a difference in the underwriting. So where are we right now? We have around 300 million of annual run rate of premium. We have offices not only in the US, Boston and various other cities, but we are also having an office in London, which is led by Jeff White, who's sitting here with us. And I had the privilege to open the Frankfurt office about like 2 months ago, basically setting up Corvus in Europe. We also just got our license for the European Union, on which we are very proud. Yeah, and we're basically very excited to bring the technology and the Corvus way of underwriting, basically how we do things, to Europe. So that's who we are, but this is really more as a background. Coming to the first topic, CAT risk. What do we know about them? So basically what I wanted to do here is really taking a step back, saying, okay, catastrophe risk, what is it? And really, I mean, like, these are the ones that we're actually very familiar with. I think we are discussing quite a lot. You discuss quite a lot. We are very familiar with the windstorms, the hurricanes, typhoons, floods, earthquakes, landslides, thunderstorm, hail losses. Drought and wildfires, especially this summer, I think not only like in Europe has been extremely hot, so but also like in other parts of the world. So one could even say, look, Oliver, this is not as static as it was. It's also like a very dynamic landscape. But here, I mean, when we look into the underwriting, we have studied these kind of perils for years. So we have flood maps, we have public records. We can go to these public records. We can basically see how much basically rain is falling. We have mapped certain paths of hurricanes, the eastern seaboard. We know it's now September, so maybe don't want to go to the Caribbean for holiday right now. So all these kind of things we know. We think we know something about earthquake as well. We have adopted with building codes and everything like that. So that is basically where we, as the insurance industry and reinsurance industry, obviously have basically to start to understand the risk, to model for it, and basically to predict the future. Cyber is a little bit different in that respect, but what we will see from all these events here, that some of the characteristics we will definitely see in a later stage as well. So, which ones are those? They definitely lead to search and claims. That's what we have in cyber as well. So when you have another WannaCry, if you have another NotPetya, we need to be operationally prepared to know, okay, there will be one claim, there will be ransomware, but sometimes you also have like a search and claim. So basically we know it has like a certain seasonality depending on what kind of event you have. You have Log4j, big question, how does it work, and all these kind of things. What we have learned about cyber actually, although it was called cyber liability policy in the first place, it's technically a very short-term nature of the losses. So when we basically, and also like in my old job at Zurich, we were looking at losses about like 6 quarters. They're fully developed, so we're not talking really about something what we would potentially initially think about liability claims. They take years, then we basically have to reserve for them. So that is basically something where we have learned they're rather short tail in nature. Business interruption, increased cost of working. I mean, I started my career in property and energy. That is basically the most tricky losses. But again, here, if you have a business that is interrupted either because there was a fire or because there was a flood, it was a cyber attack. They have loss of profits. You basically need to see how do you mitigate the loss. You have increased cost of working, not only to get like new machinery in on the property side, maybe you need to get another server in, or you need to basically find another environment basically where you can run your business. So therefore, there's some items that we maybe see in a minute as well. The other one is really, we need to double check in the underwriting on the property side, not only where they sit, what they do, but also how do they prepare. About 10 years ago, we had a lot of natural catastrophes. We had the Thailand floods, we had the tsunamis, we had Japan earthquake, we had New Zealand. So when you all look at these losses as well, it really depends how well is a customer prepared. Do they have a business continuity plan? Do they have a disaster recovery plan? So these are all these kind of things that we have learned from Catris that basically minimize losses and basically have an impact on our claims experience. Last but not least to this one, when it comes to business interruption, redundancy in the production is a single point of failure. So if this single point of failure is affected, let it be also on the supply chain, physical supply chain, when you have in the car manufacturing side, aluminum, smelters going down, or you have a large supplier for critical parts. I mean, we obviously also have certain CBI coverage in cyber that we also obviously know from the property side. So, where's cyber then so different? So technically we should feel very much at home already, I think, right? So these are some of the items where we say, okay, CAT events, cyber CAT events, where does like the technology basically come in here? So these are like the 4 items that we would put together in that respect where it makes a difference. So first of all, the risk in itself on the top left hand side changes rapidly. Floppy disks, CD-ROMs, data centers, and now the cloud. So we always need to be constantly working with the risk. The other thing is interconnectivity of software. So when we talk about earthquake zones, we talk about hurricane areas, basically like also a certain path for hurricanes where they're coming. So here we basically need to think, okay, internet, cloud interconnectivity, basically how is it working together? So we definitely need to keep that in mind. Do we talk about a global risk by nature, or do we talk about also potentially a regional risk by nature? And I'll come to that in a minute. We spoke about claims and the patterns. So we are a very young product for insurance. In insurance perspective, so about like 20, 25 years, 30 years, depends with whom you speak. There's always like these war stories out there. Yeah, we wrote the first policy far before like the AIG did it. So, but let's say it's 25, 30 years. So we don't have that many claims. So we don't have 100 years of claims. We work with those ones, so it's relatively short, but I think at the same time we've already learned something about it, what I said about the nature of the claims, how do they develop, and all these kind of things. And with the patterns, I come to that in a minute as well. So some things have really proven over time. I think everybody's very familiar with ransomware, so maybe we see a pattern there. When we look at the cloud infrastructure, maybe we can see a pattern there when we talk about outages. So I would say they're all still valid, but they're not like brand new. So we definitely have something where we can basically look back into, but something we obviously need to basically keep in mind going forward when we talk about cyber. This is our hailstorm. This is our flood. This is our earthquake. This is probably also the drought and the wildfire. So basically, we have looked into 5 areas where we say, okay, what are like the cat risks and the scenarios that we have in mind? So, I mean, obviously this is not what we at Corvus developed ourselves. I mean, there's, I think, a certain agreement in the industry that there are certain items that are now accepted. Also, when you speak with the modeling companies that are out there, when we also speak with the large carriers that are out there, with the reinsurers. So therefore, what we wanted to do here on this slide, and it's a very busy slide, trying to summarize on one page what we're talking about. It's impact and insurance response, because I think that is also quite important here when we talk about a certain risk, when we talk about what is it, how does our insurance policy respond and attaches. So we're all familiar with security failure, system failure, and then also like the CBI coverages. So basically we need to see here, basically what is it, how can we underwrite to it, and basically what does this policy wording say, because let's not forget, we are technically just in selling papers, contracts, promises, but they also come with exclusions. So these are the impacts. This is the insurance response. And when you look into this, you have the data loss. You can have various scenarios. Okay, how can one data loss affect many companies, either via data centers, via the clouds? Cloud outage, I think that is when you talk about cyber, that is always the elephant in the room. Everybody goes to the cloud. How do you deal with this? How basically can you account for this one? So this is something we definitely need to look into, especially when we provide CBI coverage. I mean, you can have the discussion and say, look, is there something, you know, we actually want to insure? Should we insure this? Should we just like insure the IT assets of our customers? But basically, when you look into how the IT security is working at the moment, everything is getting outsourced, everything goes into the cloud. So basically, also like the insured will lose certain kind of control over like the assets they're technically responsible for. When you then talk with somebody in data privacy, they would say, well, the data might be in the cloud, so somebody else is responsible for the cloud, but you're responsible for the data in the cloud. So although you just like put it somewhere, you lose it, GDPR is still there for you, so you cannot just like outsource this kind of liability. I put DDoS on it because I think it has been one of these, let's say, more classic kind of scenarios. What's happened when tons of bots are attacking a certain area of the network, and we've seen some of DDoS attacks coming back a couple of years ago together with extortion, double or triple extortion, where you would say theft of data, encrypting data, and then basically with a DDoS attack on top of this unless the ransom is paid. At the same time, and this is actually what I find fascinating in cyber, you would also have strong technical controls when you look at some products from Akamai or from Cloudflare, where you say, yes, it is a scenario, yes, there's potentially coverage, but yes, there's also like a very powerful technical solution for this. So I would maybe rate that a little bit downwards. Cyber extortion. Well, I think these are like the two things when you work in cyber you discuss all the time. What you do with the cloud and what you do about ransomware, what you do about like cyber extortion. And we're still thinking, okay, some of the patterns that I was talking about, so you have cyber extortion, you have the ransomware. So how can this be like a cat event? And this is, I think, where I say like the jury is still out. I mean, it is a mass phenomenon, but very much on a per risk basis. So it is a global trend. You have global crime groups that basically look into this, but it's still very much customer by customer by customer. Where it becomes tricky when you have a certain, let's say, malware functionality self-propagating, so that jumps from one computer to the other computer without any kind of ransomware gangs, looking for like a certain weakness and then trying to do this. So therefore, I would still keep it there. It is still what we would call a security failure in the wording. So therefore, it is still something where the coverage does exist. Last but not least, behind the palm thing here is a blackout. But when we all think about some of the Lloyd studies that I've put out there, what do we do with a wide power outage? I'm from Germany, so it's basically something we're discussing right now. Okay, Putin doesn't like us anymore. What is with the gas? Do we have power or not? It is, I think, a scenario when you look at the banks, what the ECB says. Look, guys, it sounds absolutely absurd that we could think about that in Europe, but we need to think about it. Would that be a loss under cyber insurance policy? Here, I would say I'm not too worried about it under cyber because we have an infrastructure exclusion. So everything when the infrastructure is out, that would not be covered. And I think personally, that's my view, the infrastructure exclusion is probably much stronger and more important than the voluntary exclusion in any cyber policy. So therefore, it's a bit with DDoS. You have maybe something, you have a technology mitigation for it. Also, you have a risk, but there, basically, the policy wording would give you like another view on this one. We come to this one in a minute, again, when we talk about the clouds and basically our risk aggregation platform, because this is basically where we at Corvus spend a lot of time on. What is the cloud? I mean, some people would say it's the hard drive of somebody else and you just pay for it. So instead of, you're buying your own data center, you just make a contract with somebody else and then you upload it, download it somewhere else, and then there you have it. But obviously, it's also applications, it's entire environments that you have there. I mean, that was also like one learning for me coming from, let's say, the classic world from AIG in Zurich, now working in a tech company. Everything is on the cloud, everything is Google, everything is on Slack. So everything, I'm asking myself, where are my documents? Yes, Oliver, they're in the cloud. Good. But where are they in the cloud? In which region do they sit? And I think that's a very important point when we talk about regionality of losses. When we talk about, is it really like a global exposure that we have, or can we also segment it a little bit into physical geographies where we can talk about it? So basically, we were looking a little bit, okay, let's be honest, there are 3 large cloud providers out there. They're all American, called AWS, Azure, and the Google Cloud Platform here. But what is really important, what you see in the first and the second line, is the region and the availability zone. So there's not one big thing, but you would have, and I don't have a pointer now, so I'm just running in here. You would have various regions, basically where the data centers are. So basically where it is also clustered. And that's what I think we definitely need to keep in mind. There is a cluster and availability zone, a region in the US. We have various regions in Europe. So when we talk about a cloud outage, do we really think that 25 regions which consists each region of either 3 availability zones, all go down at once. All of these data centers have backup supplies and all these kind of things. So that is basically where we think about interconnectivity, but also ultimate redundancy. That is basically what you do not have in the physical world. So in the physical world is you have basically one production facility. If that is out, yes, you maybe have another production facility in another country, but you still need to physically bring it there. And I think here the beauty is with the cloud, you have the interconnectivity, but you also have like this super quick redundancy. You sometimes hear about this, there was, Squid Game came out and all the entire cloud region in Korea broke down. Well, they broke down for 4 hours or 5 hours, because then you basically can go to like a redundant site and basically pull the data from there. And I think that's also what we definitely need to keep in mind when we talk about cyber insurance, basically how that is working together here. And we come back to that when we talk about the risk aggregation platform, because I think that is basically what we need to understand as the books are growing, as we're taking on more and more risk on the balance sheet. How is it going to work? So we need to model that also potentially different. Are there any questions at this point? Crystal clear? Okay. Good. In the next session, I want to go more into underwriting, how we at Corvus do underwriting, and how we deal with this dynamic risk landscape. Come on. So what I did here is basically mapping, let's say, the traditional underwriting workflow. So how do I look at risk? I think sometimes there's always a bit of a debate. Okay, well, you just look at stuff and ask some question. No, I think there's a lot of methodology behind it. So basically, it's also the same thing what we also do in other lines. You have the cyber risk exposure on the left-hand side. You basically then also apply it to the industry or like the customer that you're having. Okay, certain items, especially on the extortion and the ransomware side, are definitely universal, but obviously some are affecting more customers than others. Obviously, if you're like an insurance company yourself, if you're like a bank yourself, data loss, all these kind of things have like a bigger impact than potentially data loss would have, especially when you talk about PII, PHI, credit card data, than let's say a manufacturer. Well, obviously like a manufacturer with the global supply chain, there would be more concerned about business interruption and increased cost of working. So you would have some nuances at this point, but then the middle really becomes the absolutely crucial part. How do you control this? So you would have cyber, you would have exposure, but obviously we would want to look at the controls. And what I personally always find is a very good kind of guidance. I mean, when I look at our kind of questionnaire and of kind of our controls, you would have 100 questions. We have some questions for the SME, then the middle market, then the corporate book. It becomes quite a catalog, but I think in order to make it a bit easier to understand where do they all fall into, you would look at the NIST framework. I always found very powerful. So that is an American framework, a National Institute of Standard and Technology. I think it's publication 800-46, 47. So there you basically find it all. So we haven't invented this, but this is basically something that I always find as a very good guidance, really to understand, okay, what kind of controls that I'm looking at. I would like to look at how does the insured identify risk? How do they protect against the risk? How do they detect if something is going on in their network? How quickly can they see any lateral movement, for example, within the network? How do they respond to this one? And how can they recover from this one? Especially the last two, I think we should know from property as well. So here I think, again, I feel very much at home from my very early days in insurance and in claims, where I say, okay, these are like the 5 areas we're looking into from the cyber underwriting. Obviously, in a regular way, very manual. Get a risk submission, get your application, then you open your file, then you try to capture it all, and then you basically see, okay, what are the controls? How well do they control the exposure that you see on the left-hand side? And basically, what is my residual risk? and then obviously you apply the coverages, and then you do the pricing. At Corvus, we then would put the technology on top of this, or we have the technology as the basis and do the traditional underwriting on top. We say, okay, there's certain items that a person, that a human being can see, something that a machine can better see. And this is basically how we bring that together, and you will see that also in another slide. And that's, I think, what we at Corvus focus on the most, how to bring together this perfect symbiosis between what people can do better and what machines can do better. So basically we have developed the Crowbar, which is our workflow software. So you will see or hear the word Crowbar once in a while, and then the Corvus Scan. So the Corvus Scan is a proprietary scanning technology that scans the perimeter of the insured, basically collects data, publicly available information, similar to Google. Everything that's flying around, everything that you can filter is aggregating this in an automated way and gives us a certain score. Now you will say, oh, that's great, Oliver. We use BitSight and Security Scorecard. Also great companies, but their score is basically not made for insurance. That is basically made for insurance, that looks at weaknesses, that really drive losses on an insurance policy, and that basically bring me as an underwriter what I always wanted to have, an automated first view at risk. This is not the end to everything. This is part of the underwriting. So it's not, this is all alone. It's also like the other part, but also this one here. So basically this one is assists me very much in the underwriting to have a better risk selection. I would always say if a house already looks pretty bad from the outside, probably looks pretty bad from the inside. Still, if it looks great from the outside, still doesn't mean that it looks amazing from the inside. So it only gives me the outside view. It basically automatically aggregates here into these various scores that I can also see basically where certain weaknesses are. It is consisting of 8 patterns, and one big area within the Corvus score is a ransomware score, where we basically looked also at specific items, VPN providers, RDP ports that drive the ransomware score that then feeds very strongly into the Corvus score. Okay, here I jumped the gun a little bit. This is basically how we want to bring it together. What can a person do better? What can the machine do better? Especially on the left-hand side at the bottom, I think that is something that the machine simply can't do. And I think that's where we bring, I would say, the trade of underwriting. I see it really, for those who speak German, das Handwerk together with the technology, right? So we're not saying it's only technology, it's only like the old school way, it's somewhere like in the middle. And when you remember on the NIST framework, the respond and the recover, that is something where you can't see it from the outside. That is basically where you need to have your application form, that we need to have a conversation with our insured. How do you do this? We capture the data, we capture it in a structured way, it goes into our Crowbar, the underwriting platform, where then also structured goes into a database, so that we have a view from the outside and from the inside and bring that basically together. And that's what you basically see here on the right-hand side, where we have like a structured capturing of like the invisible. So where we map our underwriting questionnaire in the Crowbar, that we have like a data set, which is now expanding to data from the UK, also continental Europe, global data set that we're building. So that is basically how we're approaching this altogether. Yes?
Kevin Ledieu from the Carte Underwriting. Just one question. So I think I completely understand the beauty of scanning everything which is outside available very quickly. What about internal information? So do you see clients that, for example, do not understand any questions that you ask, or how do you handle that? And do you see sometimes a conflict after an event, saying, okay, you answered that, and actually it's just not the case? Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. No, I think we spend a lot of time with our customers and also like with the brokers to really understand this kind of workflow. We want to make sure that, and that's I think one of our guiding principles. Is there something that technology can solve? And if we find there's a technology solution for it so that we don't have to ask this question, then we try to do that either with the scanning or some other data that we can buy, so that we really only need to ask basically what we cannot see. But we obviously have to discuss also with our customers. So we have a risk and response unit, so risk and response. So these people basically onboard the customer also to the platform. So when you basically buy an insurance policy from Corvus, you get onboarded to this environment. So you would have constant access to this. You can speak with our risk and response unit. So basically then they can talk you through it. They can give you basically the background to what it is. We also have a very large CISO organization, and I come to that later on, where you can also have a discussion, basically what does the threat mean. But you're right, we need to explain a lot. It's still very young, but that's why we also work a lot with brokers together to explain what we're asking. And I think we've seen over the last years very much how the questions come together. So when you look at the Marsh questionnaire, Aon questionnaire, or some other questionnaires, I think it's now everybody understands basically what the critical items are. So I think this kind of explaining what we're doing became much less over time. Yes?
On that point, is there any prospect of the questionnaires being standardized so that people don't have to fill out every one?
Depends what you mean with standardized. So I don't want to answer with another question. I think there's a certain question set, or like the risk controls that you want to have. I think how you ask for them doesn't really matter. So I think you can phrase the question in a different way. We would map internally these kind of questions or like questionnaires to ours. So basically what we have like one big mapping canvas. So we say, okay, our question number 23, for example, matches question number 38. The questionnaires, I think they will never be standardized, but I think the relevant risk items that you want to know, I think they become standardized. When we talk about MFA, when we talk about RDP ports, I mean, these are like standard questions, sometimes asked from a different angle, but I think the market definitely converges to like a certain minimum requirement that we would also have as well. Yeah. But then I think once you get a look at larger risks, I think then, and we see that all the time, some carriers asking more in this direction, some more in this direction. So there's still like a little bit of a difference there. Good. The Corvus Risk Aggregation Platform. So we are halfway through. I hope it's still not too hot. I'm still okay, but if you want, please grab some drinks. We want to talk about the Risk Aggregation Platform because I think that is something. It's not out there in the market yet. We're extremely proud of. And also one of the things I spent a lot of time on at Corvus, because I think that is something that goes a very long way in the future, where we basically want to have our risk capital partners, reinsurers, basically like a live insight into the portfolio, how the portfolio is performing. Do we see any accumulation, aggregation within the portfolio? Maybe going a little bit of a step back, how did I spend like the beginning of the year? I was preparing our treaty buying, and whoever worked in a large insurance company, that is always a endeavor of a couple of weeks and months, where you basically go to your local business units, you send out the Excel template, then they send it back, they go to their local IT systems, they try to have like a data dump in this kind of template, then you try to bring it together, and then hopefully after a couple of months, you come with a master spreadsheet, basically where your risk is. And there you would have name of the insured, turnover, SIC codes, DNB numbers, and all these kind of things. And basically also you would have limits, you would have maybe retentions, you would have supplements on certain items, things. And this is basically how I think we bring it all together. So what we did at Corvus, okay, how can we develop that further? When we look at all the risk items that we had before, how much do we still then know about the portfolio when we know, okay, we have 20% manufacturing, when we have, 30% risks in Italy or something like this. So what we were thinking about, okay, how can you go one level deeper into basically what the risks are and basically what the quality of the risk is. I think that's what I'm trying to head at. So we have developed the Corvus Risk Aggregation Platform, which is now also a trademark, I was told. So the TM, it's our analytics tool to really go into the live data sets of risk capital. I go through all of these items in a minute, but this is basically on one slide all the kind of risk items that are basically flowing into this from the external perimeter, from email providers, VPNs, e-commerce providers, software providers. I mean, you probably had that as well when Kaseya hit, and I got these calls from my boss as well. Oliver, how much is our portfolio exposed? And you sit there and say, look, I don't have all the underwriting files and folders of all our thousands of customers here. So that is basically what we want to capture here on a continuous basis, bringing that all together. Basically, what is the exposures of our insureds also to the outside world? Because it's sometimes out of their control, but we still need to know basically how that would impact our portfolio. There are like three big parts and elements within the risk aggregation platform. The first one, obviously, the aggregation analytics. So really to understand, and I will have a demo in a minute so we can click through it. How does it basically look like on a live basis? Analytics. Are we overweight somewhere? Is it something where we are uncomfortable with? What do we basically see in the portfolio right now? Then the other one is like threat intelligence section. Log4j. When you have these kind of things, and you probably have that as well, it takes a couple of days and it hits all the newspapers. Everybody's talking about it. All your bosses call you, want to know how bad is it, how is it affecting us, what shall we do about it, shall we send like an alert out to the customers, and all these kind of discussions you have internally. And you sometimes don't really know, okay, is this, how bad is it? Is it really a disaster in the making? Do I need to take action? Or is it something where I say, okay, there will always be vulnerabilities every day. I mean, like when you look at the CVE register, I mean, there are tons of vulnerabilities that you know about. That's why we have the threat intelligence section. And I will show that to you as well. So basically, our CISO organization writes an abstract and collects all the information about the threats. You can read about it. We can also see basically how it affects your portfolio if you're a risk capital partner with us. And obviously, if you want to know more about it, click and schedule a consultation. So just like click on this one, reach out to our CISO, Jason Repholz, and he basically will make time for you to talk you through it and also the portfolio. How bad is it? How, for example, we as Corvus are dealing with this. So that is the second part of it. We have prepared 2 data sets in preparation for this. So we looked at some of the risk data that we have and made a demo version of it so that I have here on the computer. If the Wi-Fi is still working, we can really click through it, that you basically can see basically on a live version how much capacity is deployed. Try and do this. Associated limits, so you see like the capacity deployed in the live version. Then you have the total premium on how many policies, and then on the left-hand side you would have the Corvus score on a live basis. Normally, the threshold for us writing a risk is a Corvus score of above 80. Now I'm challenging myself and say, okay, Oliver, that looks great. There are some in the portfolio that is below 80. So how can that happen? That happens because we're looking at live data here. So we underwrite a risk, have the certain scoring, we have the Corvus score about 80, then it goes to, let's say, the more manual risk underwriting process, then we accept the risk. But we look at the risk with our customers throughout the entire policy period. Not just once a year, then there's renewal, we do the same thing again. So basically what we see here, it can drop to a certain point, and then we can basically reach out to our customer and say, look, We saw that something has changed, something has happened. Can we help you? Here are some of the ideas, basically, how you can basically bring the risk posture back up. So this is basically why we sometimes see it below 80. Our risk capital partners, capacity providers can look at this as well and can also say, yep, these guys are making sure that it stays above 80. So this is like the full, let's say, live transparency in this respect here. Oh, there's an animation. Okay, good. All right. Same goes for industries. When you look here, you can filter by the industry. Obviously, when we have underwriting guidelines, how much do we write? Are we really living to this one? So I would say this is a more like SME middle market service-oriented portfolio. And basically, I'm just like clicking through like the top left here. And now I'm jumping on this one to the second part of it's like the software data. So on the left-hand side, you had the insurance data. Now we're looking at the external perimeter, basically, of all of our insureds, basically how that looks like. So here we're looking, okay, hosting providers. We spoke about Amazon. So how many of our insureds are exposed to Amazon? How many are exposed to the Google Cloud? How much have they on it? So this is basically what we're also measuring in real time. So you basically can see, okay, how is the score going? How are they exposed? We hear something about it. So basically we can have like an instant view right now into the portfolio on how that is working. Can also do other things. You know, everybody who works in cyber got the call, I think about like end of February. How much are we exposed to Russia? Oliver, tell me right now. Okay, do it now. Okay, then panic sets in, you speak with the underwriting community, you speak with your risk engineers, and you basically go through it, you basically work with your service providers and saying, okay, how much is it? So here, this shows how many of our service providers of our insureds are exposed to this. So this is basically showing, okay, our insureds, they buy certain services. Maybe we can reach out to them. Okay, who has like exposure in the Russian Federation here? So therefore, you can have like a very quick overview. Okay, you have a certain event that is happening. How relevant is it to your insureds and onto your portfolio right now? Summary again, what we just like talked about the threat intelligence. How does it look like? What is like the policyholder impact? Log4j, okay, I understand now what it is. How does it impact my portfolio? Kaseya VSA, heard about this, bad thing. How does it affect my portfolio? This is the third function. It's an alert function. So you can say in our platform, look, I only want to have 20% of healthcare in my portfolio. I only want to have 30% exposure to hosting providers such as Amazon in my portfolio. So, and I showed that to you in a minute. You can basically set that in. You set an alarm. If it hits that threshold, you get this email signed by Laurie Bailey, who sits over there, our head of Chief Insurance Officer, and by Mike Cabassi, our COO, basically giving you this insight here about once a certain threshold has been hit. So that is basically where you have like an immediate alert to your inbox, but also like for us and saying, okay, you know, here's something that we are now hitting where we basically want to have a discussion or basically need to maybe rebalance the portfolio. So that is like the third functionality in the platform. Good. Now I need to switch. Now, like, let's see if that works. Let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at it. Okay, if I'm still online, I'm logged in. You can see that? Excellent. So we are now live in the Crowbar and the Risk Aggregation Platform that basically sits behind it. So this is a demo version. You would get a login, and it looks exactly how you see it here right now. And you can basically then go into your portfolio, what we just outlined about like the total premium limits, exposure policies that you have here, and then you basically can review live, okay, what we just said, okay, we have the risk threshold about like 80 here. How does my portfolio look like? Okay, here's some guys we know we need to take care of. This is basically where we want to have them right here on a year-to-date basis. In which states do our insureds live? So there's also one of my jobs right now. We're not only an American company anymore, so you will see also some other states there. But here, obviously, since it was like a American view until like very recently, you put it really like down on states. So if you want to do like a certain mapping, then either on your portfolio on the geography where they are sitting, you could also say, hey, how much do I have in California? How much do I have in like all these other states in the US? Industries, what we just like spoke about. Okay, this was foreseeable. That was not foreseeable.
Always with the demo environment.
It's always with the demo environment, yeah. And the ransomware score. Okay, so
Give it a quick refresh.
yeah, let's just like see. Okay, now I'm out. All right. But since it's live, I hope it does work. Yep, do that. Okay, that is basically what you want to avoid. But here we go again. So that's a great thing about the cloud. It's not on my computer. So we can now basically look back in. So what we just like spoke about, DNS providers, email providers, you know, do they all use Gmail? Do they use something on Microsoft? What kind of email security software are they using? External architecture, databases, products, hosting countries, what we just like spoke about. Let's see if we find something on Russia here. Okay, it's definitely not a lot. Okay, we have 5 policyholders that still use providers that have an exposure to Russia here. That is also like a concerning thing, so we might want to have a conversation with these guys, you know, if they maybe use services that are basically exposed to like a sanctioned country. So yeah, this is basically everything that you would see as a risk capital provider with Corvus in a live version to answer all the questions that you might have. Same thing here, let's say for the hosting providers. Amazon, Google, other hosting providers, what kind of technology do they use and all these kind of things. So that is basically an aggregation platform, and after this I have another slide where we want to give you a bit of like an overview. What are we doing with this? I mean, this is simply the start of our journey and some of the ideas how we want to basically develop that further. That is a threat information, so the second feature of the platform. And you basically see here, okay, the last one we had reviewed was in June. Let's see if we find something else here. So here would be everything about Log4j, so you can click on Learn More, then like another page would hopefully pop up. Oh, it does, great. Good, but you can basically read everything that we have collated here, what it means, all the information. I think that we also can have a very educated discussion about certain risk. All right. Coming back to the crowbar. Here we go. Last but not least, yeah, here's like the button, schedule a consultation. So we definitely want to have the interaction with all our partners to say, okay, I read about this, I have the insights. I would really like to discuss it through. Basically, what does it mean to my portfolio? So just click here, schedule a conversation with our CISO, Jason Rappolts, and his team. Here you can set the alert. For example, hosting providers, or you can also choose industries. You can choose email providers, but you can also choose limits. Say, guys, don't exceed the limits that we spoke about in underwriting. So here you can also keep helping us stay honest in what we're doing. So, and here the hosting provider is saying, okay, I'm really feeling uncomfortable if my portfolio, the insureds, would use certain hosting providers. Okay, say Google. See if it's really live. Then you would see if I get an email. 1 second if I set this alarm. Laurie, you might get an email as well. So let's see if that's happening. Set this to 20%. We add the alert. This is now set here. And then you should also get like an email pretty quickly saying your alert has been set. I got it here right now. You got the email alert. So if you don't want to have it anymore, then you can just like remove it out of the platform. And off you go. Good. I'm really glad that this worked again. Otherwise, it would have been a bit of a disaster. Because I mean, you can see we are very fascinated at Corvus by this platform, spending a lot of time on this one. And yeah, to basically come back to the slides, to maybe wrap it up. This is not it. I mean, like, this is basically what we at Corvus built over the last couple of months with our tech team. Also very new for me in this new world. Half of like the staff at Corvus. It's more on the tech side, but we also have a lot of insurance side. So that's what I really enjoy, that we bring that all together at Corvus. But yeah, this is not the end of the story. So we are defining right now what kind of other items you would like to have there. So this is really just for food for thought that hasn't been agreed yet, but where we think, okay, you know, shall we have more revenue bands? But that's where we also want to work with you. We can work with you where you say, look, Oliver, for our modeling internally, we would like to have this and that. Speak with us. We can put it into next development cycle, and we can review it that we make it a feature of the Risk Aggregation Platform. Do we want to have average retentions, waiting periods, policyholder locations? We have that already. On the US basis, we can do that something else. Hosting providers, we spoke about that earlier. That's why we're thinking a lot quite now. We can filter to Amazon, we can filter to Google. Wouldn't it be great also to really filter, okay, do we have something, let's say, more on the Northern Virginia AWS region, where we say, okay, this is the largest AWS region that we have. So that obviously has a completely different meaning than a smaller region. So basically, how can we break that down further? Also to see, okay, we see that our insurers are basically in the cloud and that they're using these outside services, but how dependent are they on it? If they're like more like a classic, let's say, company, they would say, okay, you know, I use some services in Google, but look, if it doesn't work for like half a day, it doesn't really kill me. For us, it would be like a big issue because our business dependency on the Google Cloud is very high. So that's what we think about, what we can do there with the technology. Also, how we can more capture what we do on a manual basis. So, you know, to find out to which extent they use MFA, we would put in on a manual basis. So basically, how can we also aggregate risk items that we get out of application forms? Employee awareness training. These are always like these kind of soft factors, you know, like in cyber risk. You cannot see that from the outside. A machine cannot see that, but we will obviously ask for this one. So we also need to see how we can have risk management insights that we captured, let's say, in the traditional underwriting way, putting it into the platform to have like a full encompassing, you know, risk view. We would like to develop heat maps where you can basically see very quickly, give me a snapshot of my portfolio, how does it look like on a visual basis. So we also look, okay, how can we visualize some of the data that you just saw? At the moment you can really just like scroll down, you can filter for it, how can we visualize it? This is a complete mind map at the moment. This is really, nothing is set in stone here. These are some of ideas we discussed. Obviously we need to see some items here that we can do, but for us, and that's very important, it's a partnership. We want to work with you guys to say, does it make sense? I spend a lot of time with 2 insurance carriers. They had a certain view. I also sometimes speak with other colleagues that came from other insurance carriers. They have like a different view. So basically we try to collect that all to really say, okay, what is like the most meaningful insight that we can have here? So please speak with us. You hopefully have seen some of the leaflets that we have there. There you have all our QR codes that you can scan. Shoot me an email. We can share this presentation with you guys. We can also share like a presentation, live presentation of the Risk Aggregation Platform. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to us to have an insight into the slides. And with 3 minutes spare, we can have a Q&A, but obviously also longer if you don't find it too hot in here. Please.
Even having glanced at your website, I haven't quite understood what your business model is. Are you a service provider to the insurance industry? Are you an underwriting agency, or are you a risk carrier? And also, if you're just a service provider, what did the 300 million or so in different capital raising rounds go into? Just developing the software and marketing?
We are an underwriting agency, so an MGA. So InsurTech, MGA, so we write risk. Yeah, apologies, but good question to clarify that. No, we underwrite risk. So obviously we work with risk capital partners in various countries that basically give us their capacity to write risk on. But let's say in the classic MGA way. But here we really want to make a difference to say, you know, how do we use technology in underwriting the risk? So we're not carrying it ourselves. I mean, there's some items we have a captive sitting in the US where we could think about certain items, but traditional business model, what we're doing, we're an MGA, let's say like in the classic sense, but obviously with the InsurTech twist to it.
As an MGA in development territory.
Correct, that's what we are. In the US, in the UK, and now also in Europe. Everybody wants to have lunch? I definitely want to get out of this room and get back to colder temperature. So if you don't have any more questions, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much for being here for an hour. Thank you. Yeah, I'm still here. I need a cold water, but please feel free to ask questions. Take one of the leaflets, scan the QR code, email us.
Leave your contact details
Thank you.
if you want us to send you the slides.
Yeah, thank you.